Our next guest, her name is Joanne Dallaire. It's a nice French name, but I don't think she speaks it. She currently sits as an elder at the Ryerson Aboriginal Education Council. She works with various Aboriginal agencies in Toronto and the National Capital Region, and is often a visiting elder at Kumik and the Dodem Kanonsha healing place. Joanne has made extraordinary contribution in the areas of counseling, advising and educating on Aboriginal concerns, and empowering and capacity building with Aboriginal communities and non-Aboriginal communities at large. She has dedicated her career to serving the Aboriginal community and advocating for change in terms of broader societal relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. So please, let's welcome Joanne Dallaire.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay. How'd I get to be here? Well, right across the water where I'm living now is Quebec. That's where I was born. Move that out to the side. That's where I was born. It was kind of a crapshoot. My mother missed the train from Matisse to Toronto, so she came to Ottawa where she had a sister in Hull, so that's how come I wound up being born here. My mother is a residential school survivor. She was the youngest of 11 children, 10 that survived, and her mom died. And her and the sister next to her went to residential school as a result of that. My mother was very, very unhealed from that. And when I was born, I was the product of an illicit affair with a married Aboriginal man. I was born in 1951, so she was Roman Catholic, and that was about the worst thing you could be, so she took off and came here. When I was 3 weeks old, she met some buddies that she drank with, and they always wanted to have a child. So they were in their early 50s, and I lived on Wellington Street in Hull, Quebec. It was an extremely violent upbringing, all forms of abuse, incredible sexual abuse. And we wound up moving to RR3 Napanee in the middle of the night. I remember the man I called my father screaming at the driver of the truck when the mattress fell off, "Keep going, keep going." Apparently my mother, my birth mother, was getting married and her husband-to-be wanted to come and take me. And they found out, and we left in the middle of the night. So we wound up in RR3 Napanee, which is a little one-lane dirt road, north shore of Hay Bay. And I was always told that I was not Indian, that I was French Canadian. And I know that there's a lot of Quebec people who are hiding under that very identification. And the kids knew different. They used to beat the hell out of me every day at school. I had long hair. And the man I called my father liked my hair, and he used to brush my hair all the time. I never knew what it was like until I was 40 years old to have a bed to myself. The door was taken off of my bedroom, and my father and mother, the people I called my father and mother, would come in at their pleasure. Then I got married in my real wisdom of 17 to a man who wasn't nearly as bad as those two. Then I had a daughter at 20. So it wasn't until I finally left my second marriage at 40 that I had my first room to myself. But when I was coming up, I was very suicidal. I never talked to anybody. I was really afraid of people. I just wished I'd had someone to talk to. I did have a wonderful, wonderful teacher. I literally came up from a one-room schoolhouse with every row was a grade. And we were really poor. But on Sundays, for their need to have some quiet time from their hangover, I was allowed to walk up to the corner store, which was about a mile away. And I had to cross the house with my teacher, and when I come back, she'd be on the front lawn with lemonade and cookies and an ear for me. And when the man I call my father died when I was almost 8.5, she gave me 2 books. One, a book on Helen Keller, who was a blind, deaf, and dumb woman who became a real advocate for women, and a teacher. And another little book called Twizzler. It was a story of a little doll whose legs were springs, and he was used and abused and thrown away and in the dump. And on the other side of the fence, he heard a little girl crying, and she was very sad and lonely. And he used that last bit of strength he had in his springs to get up over that fence and be with her. What she did with those 2 books was tell me that anything's possible. I never forgot that. I went into Napanee. We lived there for 6 months, and my first experience with an outside community was in the school I went to. If you were going outside to pee, 1 finger. If you were going outside to have a poop, it was 2 fingers. That's so the teacher would know how long you were out in the outhouse. And so as soon as she looked your way, you could get up and go. In Napanee, I did the same thing. I put my finger up. The teacher looked at me, and I got up to go to the bathroom. And she put her hands on her shoulders and kneed me in the rear end, and I peed myself. And she said, "There, little Indian girl, now you can sit down." And that was my first experience with someone outside that wasn't nice. So anyways, I went along through life and went to school and did all of that and wished I'd had a counselor. Long and short of the story was I found myself in Calgary, Alberta, with an 11-year-old daughter and a very abusive husband, and this was our final try. So I left, and when I moved to Calgary, I really thought, wow, they give such great customer service here. Because every store I went in, there was always people following me around asking if they could help me. It took me a long time to realize, oh, I was Indian, and they thought I was going to shoplifting. I get it. I didn't get that till years later, actually. And the funny thing about it was, I was stealing all the time. So they weren't smart enough to catch me, but they sure as hell knew I was doing it. And that's one of the things that I did. That was one of the ways that I acted out. I also had an eating disorder from as long as I can remember. When I was a very little girl, I refused to eat. And I remember them force feeding me, literally prying my mouth open and shoving food down my throat. And then when I was 9 years old, I got my period, my hormones changed, and I became hungry. So I started to purge. I started to eat and puke. And I did that till I was 45. I've got about 7 teeth in my head that are mine, the rest are all eaten away by acid. I have a lot of issues with digestion and stuff because of that. And my metabolism is so messed up. But through the course of all of that, there was that native spirit in me, that fighter. And when I lost my job after living in Alberta and finally left my husband, I had no place to go. And this young woman that I worked with, her and her boyfriend bought a place, and they offered me a room, and I could wait until I got my unemployment. He said to me, "What are you going to do with yourself?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "What have you always wanted to do?" I said, "Be a counselor, but I can't afford to go to school." So he introduced me to the idea of student loans, bursaries, and grants. So I went back to school, and I became that counselor that I always wanted to have in my own life. And when I was going through placements and doing things, I still didn't have my Indian identification yet, by the way. They kept sticking me with all these Indian people to work with, and I couldn't figure that out. Like, why is everybody always giving me these Indian people to work with? And I say Indian out of love and respect, because it's been a word that's been used against us, and I want to reclaim it in a good way. And then I wound up I met a wonderful man that I worked with. He was in the social work field. And he and I really helped each other do some healing, and we decided we were going to come back to Ontario. I was grew up kind of sort of from 9 until 31 in Kingston, Ontario, and he was from Peterborough. So we went back to Peterborough. And he was the one who nailed me on my eating disorder, and we helped each other do a lot of healing. And through our relationship, I was able to heal from my sexual abuse. It was all buried, it came up. I was working in the field as a crisis counselor with sexually abused youth. And I helped him come out of the closet. he was in denial of his sexual orientation. So I was going through my sexual abuse. He was trying to become real. So neither of us were too interested in sex, so it was great for both of us. It was very loving and very healing. And then from that, I went to Toronto, and I lived there for 18 years, and I very heavily involved in the Native community in Toronto, and I began to claim back my ceremonies. While I was in Peterborough, I had two really unique experiences. Someone came up to me, a Native man came up to me and said, "Ani." I had no idea what he was talking about. And he kind of looked at me funny and kept on walking. And then one other guy came up to me and says, "Ani, Nishnabekwe." And I said, "What?" And he says, "Hello, my friend, my Native woman." I said, "I'm not Native. I'm French Canadian." And I remember he looked me square in the eye and he said, "Sister, somebody's been lying to you." And his words just resonated with me. And so when I came to Toronto, I was really involved working with women on the street. I came as an addiction counselor. I was working with women who worked in the sex trade to support their addiction. And I met a lot of Aboriginal women. And I got such strength from them, and I would hear their stories, and I would always send them to this place called Anishinaabe Health. And one day I just had this feeling to go there. It was Spirit talking to me. And I saw him moving. I thought maybe I'd speak faster. I phoned down and I said, get this, I phoned this agency and I said, "Yeah, I'm not too sure why I'm calling." "Oh, just one moment, please." Where are they going to send that message? Who's going to pick up this phone call? And so I got this person on the end and I said, "I'm not really sure why I'm calling." He said, "Well, where do you live?" And I said, I told him the area. I was living in Jarvis and Isabel. He said, "Well, we've got a cancellation. Do you want to come down and see an elder?" Okay. What the hell's seeing an elder? So I get down there. Because I'd taken other women in, but just sat in the lobby, right? And so they said, "Do you have tobacco?" And I said, "Well, I have cigarettes." "Well, have you ever made a tobacco tie?" "No." So I made the tobacco tie, and the name of the elder was Sugar Bear. I heard somebody say they're from Walpole Island. I have people from Walpole Island, that's where he is from. And all I could think of was the cereal with the Sugar Crisp Bear. And I thought, okay, I've got to get another visual because I'm going to go in there and this is not going to be him, I know it. So he's sitting there and he takes my tobacco and he says, "So what are you here for?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he said, "What nation are you?" And I said, "I'm French Canadian." And he said, "No, you don't." But then I was getting really tired of people telling me who I was, who I wasn't, and I was all confused. So then he says to me, he said, "We have spirit names and clans and colors, and they help identify us." And he said, "You can ask for yours anytime you want." He said, "Like in 6 months." I said, "Oh yeah, or now." And so I walked out of there with my spirit name, which is Shadow Hawk Woman, and I'm from the Wolf Clan, and my ancestors are Omushkigo, Swampy Cree. And he said to me, "You've got family east of here, but your real family's up north." And he said, "You don't have to do anything, they're going to find you." And I had put ads in the paper. I found out when I was 15 years old that I was born here, and I came back here, and they talked to my birth mother. She wanted nothing to do with me. So anyways, the long and short of this story is, while I was working at Anishinaabe Health, one of the elders that I worked with, she said to me, "It's time for you to do your sweat lodge teachings." So I had to go on a 5-day fast and get my sweat lodge teachings, and she told me at the end, she said, "You're going to have some big news coming your way soon." Me, I'm thinking lottery. I was hoping lottery. I had 3 bankruptcies under my belt. I was hoping for lottery. And because that's one of the things, we have a lot of issues with being connected. So anyways, Friday the 13th has always been my lucky day. Always been my lucky day. And the night before this Friday the 13th, I said to my girlfriend, wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. It was Friday, obviously. And I woke up in the morning in total and complete panic. And I realized that I had clients booked all day, But I also had to go to a conference, and I had to report back to the staff about the conference, so I double booked myself. So I get up out of the bed, and I'm running into the dining room, and there's so much snow, you can't even see out the window. Well, it turns out that my double book day went to nothing day because everything was canceled. So I'm a bit of an artist, and I thought I'm going to do some painting today, and I popped in this tape of teachings. And it was on this one where this man had been looking for an eagle feather. He was a mail deliverer on reserve down in the States. And every day when he was out, he would look for an eagle feather, didn't find one. Then he started getting obsessed about it, started going after work. Then he started going after the weekend. And years had gone by, and he was retiring. He'd never found his eagle feather, and he was really disconnected from his family. So he got out of his Jeep and walked out into the big field and bent down on his knees and asked the Creator to help him reconnect with his family that he'd lost connection, looking for this status of an eagle feather. And he begged for help. And with that was a screech of an eagle, and down came one eagle feather and landed in front of him. And the teaching in the story was, when you stop looking, what is yours will come to you. And 6 months prior, I sat out on the balcony and said, okay, you know, I've looked all my life. I'm not going to look anymore. If they're going to find me, they're going to find me. And when I heard that part on the tape, the phone rang. And it was a long distance ring. And I go over and 819, where the hell's 819? And I pick it up and I hear, hello, is Joanne Dallaire there? And I said, speaking. She said, Joanne Dallaire, born June 4th, 1951? And I said, yes. And everything I owned went to my feet. I said, who's looking for me? She said, your mother and your brother. So that was my Friday the 13th present. Now, I want to get to the positive side of this, because through all of this, the eating disorder, I was 46 when I realized I haven't thought about suicide in the last 6 months. And that was the first 6 months out of those 46 years that I hadn't thought of suicide. I didn't trust anybody. I had a real hard time keeping friends. I could get you to tell me anything, but you never knew nothing about me. And I was so lonely. That's a very lonely place to be, when you know everyone, but no one knows you. And I always struggled with who I was. When I finally got to that place of recovering my memories of sexual abuse and getting stronger, getting my spirit name, it really changed who I was. And when I met my birth family, one of my brothers phoned me. I met my mother and one sister. Then that night my brother phoned me and he said, I want to talk to you, you might not want to meet me. He said, I'm the crazy one of the family. I said, oh yeah, we're going to compare some notes. I said, I bet I'm going to win. And he said, no, really, I am. He said, I'm schizophrenic, and I was diagnosed at 16. And he said, I did some cocaine around that time. I said, I don't care about that. The first time I saw him, Spirit said to me, he's not schizophrenic. And so I used to say, come on, he was that same psychiatrist he'd had since he was 16. I said, please, just go get another, evaluation. No. I kept bugging him so much, 3 years later, he decided to do that. I said, call me, let me know how it goes when you get the results. I could barely understand him, he was crying so hard. He'd never had schizophrenia, he had a rare form of epilepsy. And that diagnosis changed his whole life. 6 months after the new diagnosis, he died in his sleep of an epileptic seizure. And I went to one of my elders and said, my brother's died. I need a spirit name for him. And he said, I can't give you that. That's the gift he's giving to you. He said, you're going to start doing that. He said, by the time you get there, you'll know his name. And he said, remember, when someone dies, there's a teaching in that for you, and how they die, there's a big lesson for you. So you think about that on your way to Ottawa. And so we go into the chapel for the ceremony, and I was co-facilitating the ceremony with the priest and myself, which I thought was rather interesting. And I said to the priest, who wants to go first, you or me? He said, it doesn't matter. I thought, okay, well, let's end on my happy note, and you can start it. And that's not what I said to him, but it's certainly what I thought. And so my daughter and I were going to sing the traveling song, and we were going to offer the teachings that we had learned from my brother's passing. And we were the first ones in, sitting down, right? And when we got up to turn around, it was a room about this size, and it was packed. And this was my family. All these people I'd never met. And when I stood up, I got stage fright. And I gave him the teachings about, what did I learn from his death? And I said, never let anybody tell you who you are. And if it's a doctor or someone of importance and power, get a second and a third opinion. And if it doesn't feel right, believe you. As I said, my brother took the word of someone and it redirected his whole life, but it gave us a gift. And then after that, I was asked to come up and do an auntie's funeral, and I wasn't ready for that. And then I was asked to come up and do a cousin's funeral up in Mattice is where I'm talking about, which is in between Kapuskasing and Hearst. My grandparents came from Attawabascat down the river, Fort Albany down to Missinaba. He was a hunter for Hudson's Bay Company. She was a medicine woman. They landed there, claimed 100 acres of land for the Hudson's Bay Company. He opened a store, and the next year he quit the Hudson's Bay Company and ran his own general store. Way to go, Grandpa. He was smart. He got the Hudson's Bay Company to pay for its move down. So anyways, I go up there, and I'm just going to end it with this. I went up there, and I brought all my sacred items. I had my pipe and wolf pelt, various things out on the table beside my cousin. And my family knew nothing of the traditional way, even though my oldest auntie was a medicine woman for the community. Nobody acknowledged that they were Native. They acknowledged they were Métis. And my mother was very dark, and my grandmother was really dark. And we all looked very Native, them more so even than me. And they wanted to know if I could give them teachings on this. And through the 4 days, like we did a sacred fire for 4 days, bathed them, taught them the whole traditional way to bury someone. Bathe the body, dress the body, the family's all involved in the whole process. And we were sitting there, and people kept coming up and telling me stories about my mother and about her and her life there. And my mother had already passed at this time. And this older Native man came down the stairs and he kind of looks. And he looks at all the medicines on the table, and he looks over at me and he goes, and I went like that. He goes like this and he leaves. Goes back and brings another older Native gentleman with him who came over and looked at the stuff and came over and kissed my hand and thanked me for bringing the medicines back to the community. And asked me if I could teach them, if I could open up the teachings to the community. So the long and short of that story is that we were all sitting around. I had my family sitting in a semicircle, and the place was packed, and I was sitting there waiting for everyone to kind of come in, and I thought, isn't this interesting? Because I used to call myself a no-name baby from Quebec. And the weekend I got back to Toronto after meeting my mother and my siblings, I realized, wow, the number of times in the average month that people ask you about your family. I now had a different story this year. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking of all the wonderful gifts I'd gotten, of all the stories I'd heard about my aunties and uncles and my mother and my grandmother and my great-grandmother. And then I thought, I'm going to give them some teachings on our traditional way. And it was just amazing, because what I realized, I missed so much, I thought, from my experience, my childhood, my teaching ground. I sat on my pity pot for a long, long time, feeling very sorry for myself. 3 bankruptcies, 3 marriages, just not doing very well at all. And when I started to change it around, I was still really angry. But what I realized was I had an advantage. I wasn't raised in that box of family. Who I became was on me. And I was pretty damn proud at that moment, and I am right now of who I am. And I now believe that if over the age of 16, if your life is good, that's on you. If it sucks, it's on you too. Because these are simply our teachers and our teaching ground. And these incredible stories you're going to hear as this documentary is created and from people tonight are about the stories of people who have moved from victim to survivor into thriver. And life does not come with an eraser. I had to learn to incorporate all of my history into the building blocks of who I became. And when I moved back here, I still wasn't sure where it was. I was born, I was sitting in Kumik. I've been here for about 2 months. I was visiting at Kumik as an elder. I heard Spirit speak to me. It's right across the street. And it was right across the street. At 45 Wellington was where I spent the first 4.5 years of my life. And I had come home. And I'd come home here to build on a family. Because all my siblings are here, except 2 of them are out west. And my youngest brother's out west, he's pretty damaged. And my other sister is a lot like my birth mother, very mean-spirited. I only spent time getting to know my birth mother for 10 months. We didn't have much in common, and she still couldn't be honest with me, so at 46, I wasn't about to continue in relationships that people couldn't be honest. And I came back here and I had a wonderful relationship with my one sister. Her and I are very close. But then I realized how much I missed Toronto. I'd been there 18 years. And so I'm here tonight. I'm leaving the Ottawa area at the end of July to go back to Toronto. And I'm probably be coming down here as much as I was traveling to Toronto, living here, because I've committed myself to some work to do here. But the point of all of this is that we are the sum of all the pieces of us. That our past, Maya Angelou is one of my heroes, along with Helen Keller and a few other great women. And she writes, we're simply doing what we were taught to do. And when we know better, we will do better. This panel, this audience, is full of people who know better and who are doing better. And every time we make a move in a more positive, different direction, we change that history. There's a teaching that I received, it was called, we carry the blood memory of 7 previous generations. Seemed like a really great story. Because we really don't believe anything unless we've experienced it. And when I met my family, I felt that 7-generation blood memory coursed through me. And science has proven that DNA carries memory. But being a trained counselor, I also know we can change the neural pathways of our thinking. And we can change the outcome for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. This work is so incredibly important. There is the human language. You are all touched by these stories because everyone knows what it's like to be betrayed. So please continue to support Colleen and her work, all the people who have dedicated all this time and energy behind. And remember, tell your story. Share with people who care about you, who love you. Tell them who you are. Stand tall, be proud. Thank you very much.